starts.
Greetings everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm your host Captain Rye, and today's video comes to us courtesy of Dear Mr. Frodo. Mr. Frodo is in the Tier 8 U.S. destroyer, the USS Benson. Now the USS Benson at Tier 8 is a destroyer that I consider the pinnacle of the American destroyer line based on the tactics that you have to develop in order to successfully play the American destroyer line. But I consider it the pinnacle of the destroyer line for those tactics simply because the Fletcher at Tier 9 has such a dramatic improvement in its torpedoes, specifically the reload time, speed, and damage of those torpedoes, that the Fletcher really can be played more like a stealthy torpedo boat that just happens to have reasonable guns, more so than a ship that has torpedoes but tends to rely on those guns more than its torpedoes. Now the Benson does have to rely on its guns more than its torpedoes in certain situations, mainly dealing with targets at longer ranges greater than 7 kilometers. And that's only because the torpedoes that the Benson has, well, decently ranged when fully upgraded at 9.5 kilometers, are slow, don't do a lot of damage, and don't reload as quickly as the 10-kilometer torpedoes on the Fletcher. But the Benson is a U.S. destroyer, and U.S. destroyers, starting with the Nicholas on up, get 127mm guns. The guns are known for having a rainbow arc. However, sub 7 kilometers, that arc tends to flatten out nicely, and you can really get good, accurate shots onto targets. But it's important that you don't open up unless you're sub 7 kilometers. In fact, if you go and watch any of my Fletcher videos, you can see that I will generally not open up with my guns even when there's a nice juicy target within 7 kilometers until I've basically pushed up to a point where I'm being detected. And then, reading the situation, I'll decide if it's worth my time, effort, and HP to engage that target, or if I simply just want to turn around, hit my speed boost, and run away. So that's a pro tip for anybody working up the American destroyer line. Hold your fire on your ship until you're at a point where you're either going to be detected anyway, the enemy destroyer that you're detecting is occupied or otherwise engaged with another ship, or until it's advantageous for you to shoot at something longer range, something big like a battleship. If you're trying to use your primary battery guns to shoot anything smaller than a cruiser at a range greater than 7 kilometers, you're not going to have a good time. In fact, even hitting cruisers at greater than 7 kilometers can be a bit tricky and a bit annoying. Now, as the battle gets underway here, it's two brothers. It's standard battle mode, and Mr. Frodo has gone off to where the D cap point would normally be. He's already got his torpedoes out into the smokescreen where the Mikhail Kutuzov was last seen, and we can see here he's got one set out, and you can just look at how slow those torpedoes are by comparison to other shots. He does manage to connect with a Pensacola that was pushing through that smokescreen and gets himself back inside his own smokescreen just in time to avoid incoming shots from the Kutuzov. Now, again, this is one of those things where I say don't really want to engage at targets greater than 7 kilometers with these guns unless they're big, slow targets, specifically something like a battleship, and preferably not when there's a cruiser sitting back behind you, unless of course you've got concealment like a smokescreen. But you'll notice when he engaged that Pensacola with his guns, he actually managed to miss. His torpedoes were able to connect with him, earning himself a first blood in that battle, but the gunshots themselves from the main battery did not connect. And as you can see here, how the rainbow arcs really end up working out. When you get out to those maximum ranges of your guns, you have to give a lot of lead because the flight time on these shells is quite long. Again, flattening out the trajectory of those shots sub 7 kilometers does significantly improve the arcs and reduce the shell flight time, allowing you to get more and more shots out. Plus, it also improves your accuracy, and you can engage targets with that high rate of fire that come on these 127mm guns, to an extent that enemy destroyers, especially German destroyers at low tiers, sub Z-23, and especially Japanese destroyers, really do not like running into you. And you can surprise them quite effectively by avoiding opening up with those main battery guns until you're pretty much detected anyway. Now, dear Mr. Frodo does have the radio location skill, so he can see who is closest to him, and you'll notice that there's that smoke screen up there. That's going to be the Kutuzov again, but you'll notice that that's not the closest ship, and as he pushes up here, there's an enemy Sims. Now, this enemy Sims is 100% AFK. He has not only stopped moving, but it looks like he's actually disconnected from the game, and that's kind of unfortunate because the Sims is not necessarily a bad Tier 7 premium cruiser, but it's not a good Tier 7 premium destroyer. In fact, it kind of has a lot to do with the tactics that you learn down at the lower tiers of US destroyer, but it actually does have the decent 127mm guns, the same guns that you get on the Benson. That you can see there, it is just an AFK destroyer. He wasn't actually disconnected because his guns were still pointed in a certain direction. Now, Mr. Frodo is going to go ahead, he's going to slam on the brakes here, the Kutuzov's going to shoot at him, and he's going to go ahead and pop his smoke screen. See here as he's getting these shots off, that Kutuzov returning fire, and that again goes into one of those situations when you're considering shooting with your main battery guns. Is it worth continuing to be detected? As soon as you stop firing, it's going to take you 20 seconds, and 20 seconds when you're dealing with a cruiser like the Kutuzov is a long time, because he can get at least 3 full salvos out at you before you're going to drop off detectability. And those 3 full salvos from the Kutuzov can do a lot of damage to a destroyer. So I find that in certain situations, sometimes if I'm detected and I'm either isolated out on my own, or I don't quite have backup and support, or the enemy, especially destroyers, have a lot of backup and support from cruisers like Kutuzovs, Neptunes, and whatnot, that it's actually more advantageous for me to not open up, and again, simply hit my speed boost, pop a smoke screen, turn around and run away. Now you can see here that this destroyer up here is in the cap zone that dear Mr. Frodo has managed to push up into. And this is going to force the enemy team to come back and deal with this situation. Mr. Frodo's team has effectively pushed through the D side of the map here. There's a second destroyer over here, and you can see Mr. Frodo is detected there briefly as he gets well within that detectability range. And he goes ahead and he pops both sets of torpedoes off. He gets the torpedo tube knocked out, but he already got the torpedoes away, so that's good for him. He's spotted the incoming torpedoes. That's good for his teammate behind him. And now those torpedoes are going to go ahead and head down range. But you can see here he's detected because he opened fire. Now, I'm not sure I would have opened fire in this situation, given that I was being detected, and given that there's a lot back there, including 2 destroyers, including a Russian destroyer, which at ranges greater than 7 kilometers are definitely going to ruin your day. And I already had torpedoes going down that range, so Mr. Frodo does manage to sink that Japanese destroyer with his torpedoes there. But you can see the Russian destroyer, being very sneaky, has changed positions inside his smoke screen, and he's actually still sitting inside the cap, but he's not sitting between those 2 islands. He's moved himself just a little bit behind the headland of the island, being very smart with the islands themselves, using them as effective anti-torpedo protection. And the only way Mr. Frodo is going to be able to deal with him is to either shoot at him with his guns, or is to get around that island and drop some torpedoes into him. Now, Mr. Frodo's team has taken the lead here as they are currently up on ships. They have the destroyer advantage. They have 2 destroyers, so the enemy team's 1, and we know where that 1 destroyer is. Additionally, they're putting pressure on the enemy's base, which means even if the enemy team starts getting up into their base, and it kind of looks like that they're going to get up into their base, they're not going to be able to effectively change the points difference so long as the sole remaining ship up at the friendly base can just keep them occupied and keep resetting them. And Mr. Frodo's moving up here. He's gotten nice and close. He's popping his smoke screen, and he's going to go ahead and look downrange for targets. And he's got a battleship coming around that island. So he gets one set of torpedoes away. His second set not quite available. This is the set that was knocked out there for a little bit. So it's going to take time to reload. He's getting himself turned around with that smoke screen, keeping the smoke screen between him and the other destroyer. Now, the smokescreen changes that have occurred recently don't impact destroyers. They do impact cruisers quite heavily, but they don't impact destroyers. Now, going into the destroyer's torpedoes, especially the Benson's torpedoes, you'll notice he managed to connect with 5 of 5 torpedoes, but he didn't sink the ship he hit. That's right, that Iowa survived a 5 of 5 hit from a Benson, and those were with the Benson's top torpedoes. That should give you an idea of the difference that you end up having to deal with when it comes down to the difference between the Benson and the Fletcher, and why the Benson tends to rely on its guns more. Now, Mr. Frodo was firing armor-piercing into the broadside of that Iowa. He wasn't doing a bad job of nailing that Iowa and causing damage, but if he had used the high explosive and shot into the superstructure, he probably would have been able to set that guy on fire and secure his kill. And the reason I say that he should have switched over to the high explosive and secured his kill, as we'll see at the end of this video, gets him very, very close to a Kraken. He gets more torpedoes off that second set through that smoke screen. That enemy destroyer is still somewhere in there. The enemy team has finally started to put pressure on the friendly base, but you can see there, as the enemy destroyer has been forced out of the base, Mr. Frodo's team is finally able to start contesting it and actually capping it. So this is going to be bad for the enemy team. And the enemy team's got 3 ships currently over here. They've got a very low health cruiser, very low health cruiser. They have a destroyer still somewhere over there, and they've got a battleship that's about to get nailed by at least one more torpedo. Mr. Frodo is firing the armor-piercing, and again, I don't know if I'd be firing the armor-piercing in this particular situation. The high explosive is pretty decent and can set fires with its high rate of fire. You are likely to get at least 1 or 2 fires, and that's either going to force this battleship to burn down or hit the repair button and then run the risk of getting hit by torpedoes and flood. Mr. Frodo spots that destroyer again as his smoke screen starts to dissipate and a friendly ship moves around the island there. So Mr. Frodo's going to go ahead and get his shots off here and cause some significant problems for him. As you can see there, he's almost got him. Yes, he's managed to secure a kill, but doesn't quite get the kill on the battleship. That's a little disappointing again because he is so close to a Kraken Unleashed, and there's just 1 ship left in the game. That is a very, very low health Japanese cruiser off in the distance. And that Japanese cruiser is not going to have a good time of it, considering he's got a couple of battleships back down here who have plenty of line-of-sight shots to him, and it's not going to take much for them to finish him off at the end of this battle. So Mr. Frodo manages to secure 4 kills in the game. He does 145,000 plus damage in the game, gets himself a Confederate and a First Blood and a devastating strike. But you can see there, he used the pinnacle of the American destroyer tactics. He got up close, he laid an ambush using an island to deal with that Tier 9 battleship, but the torpedoes were just not good enough in comparison to, say, a Fletcher's torpedoes, where the Fletcher can really rely on her torpedoes quite heavily. The Benson still needs to rely on her high explosive and her guns in order to get those kills secured. Top of the team for XP earned at well over 2,000 base XP. Very well done, Mr. Frodo. Anyway, that's it for today's video, folks. If you liked the video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and leave a comment down below. If you'd like to get semi-regular channel news and updates, you can do so by liking and following me on Facebook. If you'd like to help support me and my channel, as well as gain some supporter perks, you can do so by becoming my supporter on Patreon. If you've got a replay like this one that you'd like to see featured on my channel, you can send it to my email. And if you'd like to watch me play various games live, including World of Warships from time to time, intermittently, you can do so by following me on Twitch. You can find the links for all of those in the video description down below. And as always, I'll see you next time. This is Captain Rye, signing off.